Hello, everyone, and welcome to one more session on endocrine physiology. Today, we are learning about the adrenocortical hormones and particularly the glucocorticoid. So, this particular session will be case based learning. Uh, so, let's move on to know the objectives of today's session. Competency is 8.2 under adrenal gland. The objectives by the end of this class, the student should be able to understand, list the hormones of adrenal cortex and medulla. Describe the structure, biosynthesis, and transport of glucocorticoid or cortisol, as we say. Describe the metabolism, regulation, and actions of cortisol. So, this is our objective. So, we'll start by knowing a case of adrenocortical excess. So, let's go through this case. Harold Potts is a 48-year-old employee of a local moving company. Over the past 2 years, he had gained 330 pounds, mostly around his middle, face, and shoulders, although his arms and legs had become very thin. In addition, he had purple stretch marks on his abdomen. His appetite had always been good, but in the past 2 years, it had become enormous. He made an appointment to see his physician because he was having trouble doing the heavy lifting that is required in his job. So, this is what uh, he looked like, maybe with lot of weight in the middle, lot of stretch marks on the abdomen, a round face, so much of more weight over the neck and those areas. So let's continue with the case and see. In the physician's office, Harold's blood pressure was significantly elevated at 165 by 105 millimeters of mercury. He had centripetal, that is truncal obesity with thin extremities, a buffalo hump, that is interscapular fat accumulation between the two scapulae at the back. There was a lot of fat accumulation, a moon face, and purple stretch marks, or what we call striae, on his abdomen. This was the observation of the physician. So, if it was a woman, it would look something like that, probably the abdominal stretch marks, the round face, the fat which is on the back, that is the buffalo hump, was there, and a pendulous lot of fat in the center, whereas the extremities were thin, the hands and the legs. So, and the blood pressure was high. So, these were all the findings of this person. When lab tests were done, the following were found. Serum sodium was 140 milliequivalents per liter, which is normal, and serum potassium was 3, a little less as compared to the 4.5 milliequivalents per liter, that is normal. Fasting blood glucose was higher at 155 mg per deciliter, normal being between 70 to 110 mg. Then serum cortisol level when done was found to be increased, whereas serum ACTH was undetectable. So these were his lab findings. Some more pictures on the right. So one more test which can be done is what is called as the dexamethasone test. When a low dose of dexamethasone is nothing but a cortisol, which is synthetically prepared, which was administered, Harold's serum cortisol level remained elevated. Okay, so once the CT or computer tomography scan was done, it showed 7 centimeter mass or adenoma on the right adrenal gland. So these were the findings. So it was decided that, or it came to a conclusion diagnosis that it is an adrenal adenoma. That means the adrenal gland was increased in size and probably it was producing the excess glucocorticoids. So the treatment, the adenoma was surgically removed 1 week later. So with the help of this case, let's try to understand what are the glucocorticoids role in various functions in the body. Let's put this question, which will help us to understand better. So now we know Herald had Cushing syndrome, that is due to increased cortisol levels. He had an adrenal adenoma that secreted large amounts of adrenocortical hormones, primarily cortisol and aldosterone. More so the cortisol and less the aldosterone. The increased levels of cortisol were responsible for Harold's centripetal obesity, buffalo hump, muscle wasting. We saw the thin extremities, right? Muscle wasting was there, striae, and hyperglycemia, increased blood glucose level. So how is he also had higher blood pressure? So how is each of these abnormalities caused by the increased circulating levels of cortisol? So let's try to find answers for these questions by knowing more about the cortisol. So this is some more uh, pictures of actual patients with Cushing syndrome. So let's learn about the adrenal gland. So the adrenal gland is an endocrine gland which lies above the, as the name suggests, suprarenal gland above the kidney on both the sides. On the right kidney, it appears like a triangular shaped structure, whereas on the left kidney, it appears more like a half moon shaped structure. The adrenal cortex is derived from the mesodermal origin, whereas the adrenal medulla is coming from the ectoderm. So within the adrenal gland, it is divided into the cortex and the inner outer cortex and the inner medulla, and they originate from different places. So the developmentally, structurally, and functionally, both are different. Adrenal cortex is essential for life, because there is if there is any problem with the adrenal cortical secretions, definitely a replacement is therapy is inevitable, and then cannot react to stress in the absence of the cortisol hormones. Just like we said, thyroid hormones are essential, parathyroid hormones are essential for life. This is also essential for life, the adrenal cortical hormones. Basically, the cortical hormones are, their function lies in the fields of metabolism of carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and minerals. So that is their important function. So as we said, the adrenal glands are divided into the outer cortex and the inner medulla. Again, the adrenal cortex is subdivided into three zones. From outside towards inner side, there is the zona glomerulosa. Next, we have zona fasciculata, and thirdly, the zona reticularis. So these are the three layers of the adrenal cortex. The adrenal cortical hormones are steroid in nature. The cortex is rich in cholesterol and vitamin A, and the hormones that is produced, that is the cortisol or the aldosterone, they are all having the cyclopentanoperhydrophenantoin ring, which is common to all these hormones. Cyclopentanoperhydrophenantoin ring is there in all these hormones. So all the adrenocortical hormones are basically steroid hormones. So knowing more about the details of this adrenal cortex. So as we named, there is the three layers. So this is a simple diagram which can be drawn to show the zona glomerulosa from outside towards inside. Next, zona fasciculata and zona reticularis. Okay, so you can see that the zona glomerulosa sheets of cells which are parallel to the outer layer. Okay, whereas the fasciculata form sheets in the opposite perpendicular direction, whereas the zona reticularis forms circles of cells. So the three zones, zona glomerulosa constitutes 15% of this adrenal cortex. Cells are on the long axis parallel to the surface. The functions, they produce mineralocorticoids. The zona glomerulosa produce mineralocorticoids, that is aldosterone, and deoxycorticosterone. Okay, more important is the aldosterone. Then another important function of zona glomerulosa is from these cells, the other cells of the adrenal cortex are coming up. Okay, so that means they renew the other layers. All the other layers, so fasciculata, the reticularis, are renewed by the zona glomerulosa. So zona glomerulosa produces mineralocorticoid, that is aldosterone. Whereas the zona fasciculata constitutes 60% of the cortex and it secretes glucocorticoids. The major cortisol being, the major glucocorticoid being cortisol and the minor one, hydrocorticosterone. Okay, so they are producing glucocorticoids. The earlier one was the mineralocorticoids. The name itself is giving a clue to its function. The first one, the mineralocorticoids, is more concerned with the mineral metabolism, whereas this glucocorticoid is more concerned with the glucose and other protein, fat, and these metabolisms, nutrient metabolisms. Coming to zona reticularis, constitutes 7%. The functions secrete sex steroids, that is the androgen, and to a small extent estrogen and progesterone. Okay, major sex steroids are actually secreted by the ovary and the testis, and this sex steroid hormones have minor effects unless they are produced in excess due to some abnormality. Okay, they have a minor action. Androgen. So the zona reticularis produces sex steroids, that is androgen, estrogen, and progesterone to a small extent. Both the fasciculata and reticularis work as a unit. They work together. There is a special role of the fetal adrenal cortex. That means when the age of around 4 to 5 months in the intrauterine life, this adrenal gland is as huge as kidneys in the fetus. Okay, and they secrete predominantly androgens, same function as they are doing in adult, but they are the only sources of androgens during that intrauterine life. Okay, the placenta which is there, which needs to produce a lot of estrogen and progesterone to sustain the pregnancy. For that, the precursor, that is the androgen, is provided by these fetal adrenal cortex. Okay, later we'll also learn that this whole concept is called as the fetoplacental unit. That means the fetus provides the androgen, then it moves on to the placenta. In the placenta, it is converted into estrogen and progesterone, which is required for the sustainment of the placenta. And this is essential for the maintenance of the pregnancy. So this is called as the fetoplacental unit. Okay, this is an additional function of the fetal adrenal cortex. This adrenal cortex size decreases and it predominantly secretes the glucocorticoids. Okay, and not the androgens. So this is about the fetal adrenal cortex. Next, moving on to the biosynthesis of cortisol. How is it produced? Please don't get overwhelmed by seeing this figure, but it's very simple once we practice. Let's not concentrate only from the beginning as and when I tell the subsequent steps. Okay, so we have 3 units here. So what's happening in zona glomerulosa, next zona fasciculata, zona reticularis. Okay, so today what we are learning is about glucocorticoid, which is produced by zona fasciculata. So basically, we are concentrating on this part of the field, but all are interrelated and it is very easy to learn them together. So we do that way. So there is cholesterol, okay, in the body. So the cholesterol is converted into pregnenolone by cholesterol desmolase. Okay, this particular action can happen only in zona glomerulosa. Okay, though cholesterol itself cannot be used either in fasciculata or reticularis. This particular step of converting it to pregnenolone can happen only in zona glomerulosa because this enzyme is present only in this place. Okay, cholesterol desmolase. Also, one more important factor for its conversion is the presence of ACTH. Only in the presence of ACTH and this enzyme, this is a rate limiting step, that is conversion of cholesterol to pregnenolone. Next step is pregnenolone is converted to progesterone by an enzyme 3-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase. So definitely, yes, if you're thinking whether you have to remember all these enzymes, you have to remember, you have to be able to recall this whole picture completely, because especially in multi MCQs, certain deficiencies can give rise to certain particular kind of syndromes, which are often expected to be remembered by you. Okay, so you have to remember all these enzymes. So cholesterol to pregnenolone by cholesterol desmolase. Next, pregnenolone to progesterone by the enzyme 3-beta hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase. Okay, so it is converted to progesterone. Now, these two precursors, pregnenolone and progesterone, present in zona glomerulosa, can be converted to 17-hydroxypregnenolone and 17-hydroxyprogesterone by two enzymes, that is 17-alpha hydroxylase. That means the same enzyme doing both the actions. Okay, 17-alpha hydroxylase. Okay, that is, it is hydroxylating in the position of 17. Okay, so you can remember this ring, benzene rings. This is how they look. What we told, cyclopentanoper hydrophenantoin rings. You can see that there are two benzene rings and one benzene ring over here, a penta structure. Okay, so it's not very difficult to remember this structure. So here you can see that this is getting hydroxylated at this position here. Okay, that is what is 17-hydroxy pregnenolone or 17-hydroxy progesterone. So once it is converted into these two precursors, we are not going down this lane because we are today concentrating on glucocorticoids. Okay, so the first step, from cholesterol to pregnenolone, then pregnenolone to 17-hydroxypregnenolone. This happens in fasciculator. And either it can, pregnenolone can be converted to this part, and then from here it can continue its journey, or this also can come to form this. Okay, so this is our pathway: cholesterol, pregnenolone, 17-hydroxypregnenolone, and 17-hydroxyprogesterone. Further, one more enzyme, 21-hydroxylase, converts it to 11-deoxycortisol. Okay, so this is the immediate precursor of cortisol, which is having some effects or some actions of the cortisol. Then 11-deoxycortisol is converted to cortisol by 11-beta hydroxylase, okay, to form the cortisol. So cholesterol, pregnenolone, 17-hydroxypregnenolone, 17-hydroxyprogesterone, 11-deoxycortisol, and cortisol. So this is the pathway for the synthesis of the glucocorticoid in zona fasciculata. It cannot happen without the help of this conversion happening in zona glomerulosa. So this is the biosynthesis of the cortisol. Enzymes required: cholesterol desmolase, 3-beta hydroxysteroid hydrogenase, then 17-alpha hydroxylase. Next enzyme, 21-hydroxylase here, then 11-beta hydroxylase. Okay, we have 4 enzymes. This, here, of course, this one, and this. So 5 enzymes we have for the ultimate formation of the cortisol. So this is the biosynthesis of the cortisol. Next, the hormones that are formed are cortisol and corticosterone. Cortisol is the more active form, and how it is transported once it is formed in the adrenal cortex, either in the bound form or in the free form. With the bound form, along with cortisol binding globulin, CBG, or transcortin, it is called. In the free form, which is the physiologically active form, and you know all the free form of hormones are always responsible for 2 things. One is the action of the hormone itself, and the second is that they are the ones which are responsible for the negative feedback regulation of the particular Okay, so here we have the two enzyme hormones, cortisol, two benzene rings hydroxylated here and here, that is CH2OH this way, whereas corticosterone is only hydroxylated in this place. So this is the cortisol and corticosterone. Cortisol is present in greater amount in the ratio of 13:1. The total plasma cortisol is 10 to 25 microgram per deciliter, whereas the free cortisol is always less than 0.5 microgram per deciliter. So it shows a lot of diurnal variation in the release of cortisol. The ACTH as well as the cortisol have a diurnal variation. They are more in early morning than in the rest of the periods. So this is about the transport and their normal values. Coming to the mechanism of action, you all know steroid hormones are diffusible. They are lipophilic, so they can cross the cell membrane. So this is the steroid structure. Steroid, it can diffuse across the cell membrane, enters. There are the uh, receptors in the new cytoplasm. They bind, then the hormone receptor complex enters inside and binds to a particular part of the DNA to produce this corresponding mRNA, and this mRNA moves out and there is protein synthesis. The new protein that is formed is bringing about the action. So this is the mechanism of action which is known to you. Coming to the regulation of cortisol secretion. So it is mainly regulated by the negative feedback mechanism of the free cortisol levels. Okay, so ultimately when the adrenal cortex is producing plasma cortisol concentration, based on that, there is a negative feedback on the anterior pituitary as well as the hypothalamus. But in addition to that, a lot of other factors act on the hypothalamus. They are the circadian regulations, then the stress, the emotion, the pain, and a lot of higher functions of the brain. They stressors basically, different stressors. Stressors could be emotional, physical, mental, or pathological also at times. So all these stresses act on the hypothalamus to release corticotropin releasing hormone, which acts on the anterior pituitary to produce ACTH, which further acts on the adrenal cortex. ACTH acts on the adrenal cortex to release the hormone cortisol. Okay, so this brings about the physiological effects and also the negative feedback emotions. So the basic regulation is via a negative feedback mechanism, regulation of cortisol secretion. Next, coming to the important aspect, we saw the case study. We saw so many actions, so many abnormalities there, so many clinical features. Let's see the actions of the cortisol to understand why those uh, features were there. Okay, so most important, the cortisol has several functions just like thyroid hormones. We will try to list a few of them only here, maybe about 8 to 10 actions we will list and try to learn it. Okay, so the most important actions is on the metabolisms, carbohydrate metabolism, protein and fat metabolism. Right? It has some permissive action, that is uh, only in its presence the other hormones can do their work. That is the permissive action of cortisol, water metabolism and mineral metabolism. Then its action on vascular reactivity and cardiovascular system, its action on blood cells and lymphoid tissues, action on GIT, and its anti-inflammatory action and action during stress. Okay, so these are some of the important actions which we will be looking at, beginning with the effects of cortisol on carbohydrate metabolism. So one thing we should remember is cortisol is diabetogenic. Okay, it is a hormone which is going to increase the blood glucose level. So can you please recall which other hormone was diabetogenic? Yes, if you have recalled it right, it is the growth hormone, which we have already learned, which is also diabetogenic. Okay, so the cortisol, basically remember, it is increasing the glucose levels. How it does that? By first thing is by increasing gluconeogenesis. Gluconeogenesis is a process where the glucose is produced by some other component, not the carbohydrate. Like amino acids are converted into glucose or the fats are converted into glucose. We call it as gluconeogenesis, and this is happening here. The protein will be actually degraded, amino acid is available, that is converted into glucose. Then lipids are getting degraded, lipolytic it is, so that is also converted into glucose. So all this adds up to the glucose pool in the plasma. Then the second way it increases glucose is by actually breaking down the glycogen. Glycogenolysis happens and that also releases the glucose. The third thing is it decreases the glucose tissue uptake. Okay, so basically this is the anti-insulin action. What does the insulin do? Insulin's job is to allow glucose to enter into the cells and make it available inside the cells for the metabolism. But this does exactly opposite. It decreases the glucose uptake in the tissues and hence it is lying in the plasma. So all this causes the glucose levels to increase. You can recall that there was a higher glucose level in that case study that we saw. So this is what is happening. So next, coming to the protein metabolism. In the protein metabolism, here remember this cortisol in the normal conditions, it is essential for all metabolisms to be under some uh, homeostatic state. But whenever it is even slightly more, it is having a more function of catabolism. It breaks down the protein. So except in the liver, it increases the synthesis of protein in the liver, but in other tissues, it is causing catabolism. So there is more plasma amino acid concentration. Amino acid levels increases, which I was telling you that it is also used up for the producing glucose and gluconeogenesis and hence the increased glucose level. So protein is broken down. So that's why maybe we have the muscle wasting. The protein in the muscles are degraded and it results in muscle wasting in our case, what we saw. Next, physiological effects on cortisol on fat metabolism. So as I was already telling you, it is lipolytic. It breaks down the fat, mobilizes fatty acids and glycerol from adipose tissue, leads to increased red blood concentration, makes more glycerol available for glucogenesis. So fat broken down and less formed due to less glucose transported into fat cells. Okay, less and less of fat is formed and more of it is broken down. So that's what happens. And there is redistribution of body fat. This we actually don't know why it exactly happens, why there is increased formation of fat in trunk areas and face, whereas there is decreased fat in the muscles and the extremities. Okay, so there is not much of fat that is accumulated on the thighs or on the arms, but it is more in the frontal areas. This we have not knowing exactly why this redistribution occurs, but this is what is happening. And there is also an increase in the appetite. This is all the action on the fat. Basically, it is lipolytic and redistribution of the fat over the truncal areas. That is the gist of action on cortisol on fat metabolism. Next, coming to the permissive action of glucocorticoids. Uh, so one of them is the calorogenic effect of glucagon and catecholamines. For this, glucocorticoids is essential. So what is calorogenic effect? Increase in the basal metabolism that is occurring by, more importantly, the catecholamines and less extent glucagon. But cortisol's presence is required for this action. Then the other important permissive actions of glucocorticoids are bronchodilatory effect, lipolytic, and vasoconstrictor effect of catecholamines is enhanced in the presence of glucocorticoids. Okay, so these are the permissive actions. once we go into the actions of the catecholamines. Catecholamines are actually produced by adrenal medulla. Okay, we will understand these functions more better there. Here we just know that this glucocorticoids is essential to be present for their actions. Okay, so coming to the water balance, what is the action of cortisol is cortisol in normal levels, it will maintain the normal diuresis and fluid levels. But in deficiency, it causes water loading and retention. That means it is essential, it causes some amount of diuresis. Okay, in absence of that cortisol, the diuresis does not happen and the fluid is retained. Okay, so there is water loading and retention in the deficiency. Otherwise, it is promoting diuresis, it is promoting water loss. Okay, opposite of the action of ADH. ADH is reabsorbing more of water. Cortisol's action is exactly opposite, and they will balance each other when they are in normal levels. Next, its action on mineral metabolism. Cortisol leads to increase in the sodium retention and potassium excretion. So the water retention is also explained by this, where sodium is retained, along with that water will also be retained. Okay, so that's why we could say that there is increase in the fluid levels, edema, and the blood pressure to a small extent is also responsible for this. The other reasons will be coming up. So in mineral, it causes sodium retention and potassium excretion. If you can recall, in our case study, we had a normal sodium level of 140 and the potassium level had decreased. Instead of being 4.5, it was 3. Okay, so this is the one which is causing more of potassium excretion. So what happens in adrenal insufficiency when the cortisol is less of sodium is excreted and potassium is retained, which is affecting the heart. Whereas if there is excess, that is what we call as Cushing syndrome, there is increased sodium and water retention causing edema. Okay. So this is its effect on mineral metabolism. Coming to vascular reactivity and the cardiovascular effects. First one, as we have already told in the permissive action also, the glucocorticoid is essential for epinephrine and norepinephrine to exert their vasoconstrictor effect. Okay, that is vascular reactivity. And the cortisol is positive ionotropic, has a positive ionotropic effect. It increases the stroke volume, it increases the systolic and the diastolic blood pressure. Okay, since it is positive, it increases the heart rate, it increases the stroke volume. So when both are increased, definitely the systolic blood pressure will be raised. Whereas because of the increased pressor effects, you know the diastolic blood pressure is dependent on the more dependent on the how the vascular channels are. If there is more resistance, there is more diastolic blood pressure, whereas the systolic blood pressure is more dependent on the stroke volume. So because of the increased vasoconstrictor effect, the diastolic blood pressure also increases. So that's how in our case, if you recall, we had a person, the person had both systolic and diastolic blood pressure was raised. On the blood cells, it has very different effects on the different blood cells. The RBC and platelet levels are increased, whereas the neutrophils and monocytes are also increased among the WBCs. The rest of the cells are actually decreased. Like you can see lymphopenia actually with the cortisol if it is increased. Okay. Then the glucocorticoids depress the function of all fixed lymphoid tissue, that is spleen, thymus, and lymph nodes. So whenever there is, I think here you can understand that whenever there is a problem of autoimmunity, that means these structures, the spleen, thymus, and lymph nodes are basically supposed to provide immunity. But if we start acting on our own cells, then we get some autoimmune disorders. So in autoimmune disorders, cortisol has a good role to play, where we can give cortisol, we can use cortisol to reduce this. Okay, because cortisols have a depressing function on these fixed lymphoid tissues. Okay, so on the blood cells, the RBC platelets are increased, neutrophils and monocytes are increased, whereas the lymphocytes are decreased. This is the function on the cortisol. On the GIT, the glucocorticoids increase the gastric acid and pepsin secretion. So whenever the glucocorticoids are administered, it may result in peptic ulcer. It's not that this is not the action of cortisol, which is produced inside the body. Okay, when externally it is given, this could be the factor. And it is only an additional. We know that the gastric ulcer has an infective component to it, right? Coming to the anti-inflammatory action. Okay, so before we go to anti-inflammatory action, you probably need to know what is inflammation. Okay, what is inflammation? So whenever the body is exposed to some harmful physical harm, okay, there is a response from the body. Okay, that response itself is inflammation. So what is there in the response? See, there is a pin or something getting stuck over the skin over here, entering the body. The body responds. How does it respond? There is a swelling, there is a redness, there is pain and warmth. Okay, this is the sign. These are the four cardinal signs of inflammation. So what exactly happens? This is what we see. Okay, I'm not going into details of inflammation, just for you to understand the anti-inflammatory action. I'm just trying to explain to you what is inflammation. Inflammation is a response of the body of a living tissue to an injury. What are the things, basic things that happens? There is vasodilation and increase in permeability. So there is a lot of oozing out of the fluid into the ECF here. That's why there is a swelling happening. Okay, it results in protein-rich fluid causing a small edema or swelling there. And a lot of proteolytic enzymes are released from the lysosomes, causing tissue damage. So all these things are happening, which gives rise to the redness, pain, and warmth in that place. Okay, so this is what is the inflammation. Now, what is the action of the cortisol? Anti-inflammatory. It helps to prevent inflammation. But basically, remember, inflammation is trying to tell us that there is something going wrong. Okay, so we need to treat the cause. If it is an infective cause, we may have to give an antibacterial. If it is a viral, an antiviral. Or if it is a foreign body, we may have to remove the foreign body. So the ultimate thing is what we have to do. But sometimes what happens, there are long-standing inflammation even in the absence of, if for a small triggers, what we call some inflammatory diseases are there, where we want to remove that inflammation. That is when the anti-inflammatory action of the cortisol becomes useful. Okay, so the anti-inflammatory action is found only when it is given in large doses, and it is not the normal level. It's not found at the normal level. So glucocorticoids block inflammation by doing the following things. First, they stabilize the lysosomal membrane, preventing release of proteolytic enzymes. Okay, so basically this is what they were doing, releasing the proteolytic enzymes that is blocked. They decrease the permeability of capillaries, due to which there was a swelling there. Okay, migration of leukocytes into the inflamed area. They are preventing all this from happening. These are the anti-inflammatory actions of cortisol. They suppress the immune system. They prevent the synthesis of prostaglandins and its release, which are actually the inflammatory hormones, the prostaglandins. They have an antipyretic effect, that is, they lower the temperature. So these are all the actions, anti-inflammatory actions. But remember, there is a limitation of the cortisol action. What we said, for any inflammation, there is a cause. We need to concentrate on the cause and remove the cause. But When it becomes a prolonged state of inflammation, then only cortisol may be useful. So if you do not use the cortisol appropriately, then it may act detrimentally. That is, we have not removed the cause, but we have just removed the inflammation. And just like what we say, I can give an example of a quack. When the person going to a quack, he is having a fever or something like that. The person gives an injection of Dexona, that is the synthetic cortisol. The person will not feel anything. Okay, the disease, his symptoms are not there, but the disease process is going on inside, so it could backfire. Okay, so we should not use cortisol at the wrong places, only when it is advocated. So thus glucocorticoids act as asbestos against fire and should be given with specific drugs. So that's what we mean here, that it will cover up the symptoms without actually treating the cause. So then the infection may spread and cause more harm. Okay, so only in conditions of chronic inflammation, where the inflammation has no protective role, we use cortisol to prevent that inflammation. The one more function of cortisol in higher doses is it can be glucocorticoids can be used to suppress allergic reactions. Okay, it is the treatment or drug of choice. All these, when I'm telling about anti-inflammatory actions, when I'm telling about glucocorticoid suppressing allergic reactions, this is the use of cortisol, synthetic cortisol, as a treatment option. Okay, not exactly the physiological role of the cortisol. Next, the last one, action on stress. So what is stress? Stress is any change in the environment. Okay, it may be emotional, physical, or biological. It evokes an integrated response. Okay, it's not only the cortisol. The sympathomedullary system, it produces the catecholamines. They are majorly responsible for response to the stress. In addition, the hypothalamo-pituitary adrenal cortex. So this integrated response is there to the stress. Catecholamines as well as cortisol from the adrenal cortex are responding to any stress. It affects the metabolic activity of the body. The glucocorticoids take part in stress reaction and minimize the effects of stress. Okay, so let's see what could be the probable actions that are in response to stress. As I said, these are not in uh, the cortisol actions in a unique way or alone. It is the response of the catecholamines and cortisol together. Okay, we have bundled both as a stress response. Okay, what all it could do? The brain, once it senses the stress, the hypothalamus releases CRH, and then anterior pituitary releases ACTH. It acts on the adrenal gland, okay, and releases both cortisol and adrenaline. The major places where it has its actions are: one, in the lungs, it causes dilatation of the bronchioles and helps in good uh, ventilation. Okay, so there is dilation of the bronchioles. In the liver, okay, in the times of stress, actually, a lot of glucose is produced. There is in hyperglycemia, making it available for any action that is required. It decreases the digestive activity. Okay, coming to the heart, it increases the heart rate. That's a stress response. Hence, the blood pressure is also increased. So these are some of the things that are happening, which, if they are happening occasionally, is a good response, helps to elevate stress. But in the long run, if it is a continuous stressors in our system, and this is happening on the long time, it is not a good sign. It is causing more harm to the body than the good. Okay, that's why we want to eliminate stress in our lives, whatever form of stress it may be. Okay, so for the small stresses which are routine, there is a response that is available, but it should not become a continuous thing. Next, moving on to the clinical uses of glucocorticoids, though I have already listed two of them, that is its anti-inflammatory action and its use in hypersensitivity or allergic condition. They are usually emergencies, the allergic reactions. If they are minor, it's okay. If they are major, they could be very severe also. Okay, coming to some of the other causes for clinical use of glucocorticoids to suppress rejection, organ rejection in organ transplantation. Okay, to suppress production of antibodies in autoimmune diseases, to suppress inflammatory reactions in tuberculosis, rheumatic heart disease, rheumatoid arthritis, etc. So it is used as an anti-inflammatory in chronic inflammatory conditions. To suppress production and destruction of lymphocytes in lymphocytic leukemias. It is used in allergic states. So these are some of the clinical uses of the glucocorticoids. So now moving on to the syndrome of Cushing syndrome, that is due to the excess of adrenal cortex hormones. First, the Cushing syndrome can be defined as a group of symptoms associated with prolonged exposure to cortisol excess. Okay, so there may be many causes. It may be that the cortisol is produced within the body. It may be that iatrogenically for some disorder, the cortisol is being given, or it may be that instead of adrenal cortex, some other place there is uh, production of cortisol. So whatever the reason, when the body is exposed to excess of cortisol, the set of symptoms that comes is called as the Cushing syndrome, and this is ACTH independent. That means it is not happening because there is more of ACTH, and in response to ACTH, cortisol is being produced. The ACTH here is normal, or because of the negative feedback mechanism, it may be also decreased. So if you go back to our example of our uh, case study, you can recall that in that patient, cortisol levels were increased, whereas the ACTH was very low, or it was unrecordable. Okay, and it was not measurable. So because of the negative feedback mechanism, when cortisol is in excess, it is inhibiting the production of ACTH and CRH. So it is lowered. So this is Cushing syndrome, sometimes pronounced as Cushing syndrome. Next is the Cushing's disease. This is ACTH dependent. This is Cushing syndrome, specific type of Cushing syndrome, which is due to pituitary ACTH hypersecretion. Okay, so this is ACTH dependent. The excess cortisol here is mainly in response to excess ACTH. Again, this ACTH could be produced by the pituitary, anterior pituitary, or it could be some other uh, adenoma which is producing ACTH. Like we know certain bronchogenic carcinomas which produce ACTH. Okay, so whatever the reason, the ACTH is increased here, and in response to that, the cortisols are also increased. When both are increased, then we call it as Cushing's disease. So these are some classification and nomenclature which we need to remember with excess adrenocortical hormones. Cushing syndrome and Cushing's disease could be an important MCQ or Viva question for you to remember and recall. So now we can see the clinical manifestations on the left panel, the most specific and most often seen manifestations in Cushing syndrome, and these are less often seen. So spontaneous bruising, because the skin has thinned down, protein has broken down. So, sorry, there's spontaneous bruising. There's proximal myopathy, because myopathy is a condition where there is muscle wasting is there, and hence there is tone is not there, and the function is not there. It is not able to do its, there is weakness of the muscles basically. Okay, so that is the proximal myopathy due to the wasting of the muscles. Abdominal striae, central obesity, extremity is wasting, dorsal cervical fat pads, that is the buffalo hump between the interscapular region, the round facies or moon facies of the Cushing syndrome. Okay, these are all very common, and diabetes will be there. There could be hypertension, there may be obesity, truncal obesity. In addition, there could be oligomenorrhea. There is osteoporosis because on the bone also protein metabolism is affected. There is catabolism. The bone protein is also removed, so there could be osteoporosis. And further, the less common symptoms are depression, insomnia, psychosis, hirsutism. Hirsutism is the appearance of facial hair on females. Okay, so that could be there. And some other uncommon conditions could be there. So we could identify a lot of these features in our findings in our case study, right? So again, some more figures, pictures, prior, truncal obesity, moon-like face, facial plethora is the word that is used for that. This is the small hump, buffalo hump, what we call dorsocervical fat pad. So all these are there in the Cushing syndrome. So this way we could relate with the Cushing syndrome, the features, the functions of the cortisol hormone. So let's try to get back in short with that case study. So our patient, Harold, had Cushing syndrome. His cortisol level was increased. In him, each of the normal physiological action of cortisol was exaggerated. He was hyperglycemic, had a higher than normal fasting blood glucose because his liver synthesized too much glucose. He had muscle wasting, thin arms and legs because of the protein catabolic and excess effect on cortisol. The striae were caused by decreased synthesis of collagen proteins, resulting in fragility of subcutaneous tissues. The tendency to accumulate fat around the trunk, centripetal fat, face, neck, and back is characteristic of hypercortisolism. This is characteristic is puzzling, as I said, and because cortisol stimulates lipolysis, increased fat breakdown, but however, cortisol also stimulates the appetite. So there is more food intake, whereas lipids are broken down. So for this reasons, which is not entirely understood, there is increased calorie intake and causes fat to be deposited in certain specific regions of the body. The centripetal fat distribution is also visually exaggerated because of the muscle wasting in arms and legs. Okay, so in addition, muscle wasting is also there. So you can feel that there is more obesity or central truncal obesity is there. So with this coordination, I hope you can understand the whole function of the cortisols much better with the use of this uh, case-based learning. So that's it for today. Thank you.